one NFL insider, and let me start by saying this. This is Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Ray Fittipaldo, who I respect tremendously and believe that he has so much insight on this team. It's crazy. And a lot of my insight comes from watching and learning from a guy like Ray Fittipaldo. But when it comes to George Pickens, he was asked in his weekly chat why the team, or could the team, afford another wide receiver one like Brandon Ayuk if they're going to pay George Pickens in the future. And he said, quote, "I'd argue the Steelers don't know if they should sign Pickens to a second contract. Based on his 2023 season, I think that's a smart approach on their part. There is more to being a number one wide receiver than making a couple of acrobatic catches and the occasional long touchdown catch. But I do agree with you on the trade part of this. I wouldn't give up a lot of draft capital, and I wouldn't be influenced by the rocketing wide receiver market. That's the big downside from not making a move at the draft. Jefferson signed his big deal after the draft, so the contract for any wide receiver, any of the top wide receivers you might acquire in a trade, went up too." I mean, look at George Pickens. I still think has a lot of development left. I don't think I disagree with you have to do more than a couple of crazy acrobatic catches and some long touchdown runs. I agree with both of those things. My argument is very simple, very straightforward. Last year, we came on this show so many times and talked about all the craziness that George Pickens was bringing to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, he made it very known to me that he was a fan of the show, but he heard what was coming about him and the drama and everything that was circulating around him not giving effort. Then he went on the field against the Cincinnati Bengals, had 195 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, and after the game told me that I was on the list of receipts. So plain and simple, that was enough for me to say, yeah, it's probably wide receiver one material right there. That guy's going to be pretty good in the NFL. I don't think I have any reservations about George Pickens making this work. I think if we're going to have an argument yesterday, or a topic of conversation yesterday, discussing how the Pittsburgh Steelers somewhat let Kenny Pickett down, you have to say that they have so far to this point done everything in their power to seemingly hurt George Pickens' progress. And he has done everything in his power to make sure that he remains a superstar on the rise. So I get it. Maybe you hold off and you wait, but I don't think I sit here saying the Pittsburgh Steelers make a wide receiver trade because they know George Pickens is not going to get a second contract. I think this year you look at it more like, if this guy goes off, how much trouble are you in financially if you do make that trade, because you're not going to let George Pickens go. Wide receiver one, not wide receiver one, you thinking you have some holdback on whether or not George Pickens gets a second deal here?
I do to a certain extent. I agree with you. We saw it last year, right? At the end of the year, Matt Canada's gone. Mason Rudolph comes in. He shows it in a little bit of a sample size there against Cincinnati, against Seattle, and none of the receivers did anything against Baltimore. I'm not holding that against him because it was a monsoon. But at the same time, Fittipaldo has a good point there where it is you need to be able to show it consistently. Now he's set up to do that this year. And that's the good thing is Steelers don't need to make that decision now. They have the ability to wait this year. And I believe he has another year on his contract as well, in his rookie deal. So they have time to figure this out. And he's in a much better situation now with Arthur Smith. Not to mention, we've talked all summer. It is George Pickens and his band of merry men. That's the opportunity. Can you elevate and rise to it in a full season? That's what I want to see. Obviously, he has the capability to go off for a game here and there, and he has immense talent. But at the same time, can you do it consistently over a year? That's what makes a wide receiver one to me, and that's what I'm looking for this year in George Pickens.
I agree. I 100% agree. And I think I'm looking for the same things. But I think my expectation is that that's going to happen. I don't look at it and say this isn't going to happen. This is going to be an issue. Last year, George Pickens told me, we were talking, and I was talking to Frisman Jackson too. Like that's where this conversation started, is Frisman, what is the goal for George Pickens in year 2? Because in year 1, he proved he could catch any football within 100-foot radius. As long as you throw it up, George Pickens has a shot to come down with it. What's the goal in year 2? The goal in year 2 was to be able to catch it and take it 60 yards to the house. All right, that happened. Cool. He was able to do that. Year 3, I don't know what those goals are yet. I don't know what those expectations are yet. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to Zach Azzani and break that down because there's so much other conversations to be had. I I look at it and say if year 3 the goal is to just always be a reliable set of hands, I'm excited to see if he could be a always reliable set of hands. But I don't look at this and say George Pickens has any. There's no part of me right now that believes George Pickens' on-field actions will be a reason that the Pittsburgh Steelers do not extend him. I think George Pickens' distractions, if they continue, could be a reason not to resign him. But I also think that in year 3, he's going to take a pretty significant step forward as a mature player and as a leader in this locker room, especially with better coaches, a better offensive system, some better quarterbacks, and some better leadership. So I'm not totally. I don't know. There's little parts of me that believe that George Pickens isn't around in Pittsburgh for the next 6 years, 5 years, something like that, unless he gets traded, which, this is the wide receiver market. This could happen all the time. Is George Pickens a reason I'm not making a trade for a wide receiver? Absolutely not. He is 100% a reason that I'm thinking Brandon Ayuk might be too expensive, but if Brandon Ayuk's on the table and you could get both of them, I'm getting both of them. And I'm not even worrying about it. You'll figure it out long term.
And I think I was about to say, it goes to the fact that there have been reports that they were interested in Brandon Ayuk. That tells me that the Steelers do think that, hey, we might need to have George Pickens be a number 2 going into next season if we want to win a Super Bowl this year. Because at the end of the day, again, you take it with a grain of salt. There's an asterisk because Kenny Pickett is what he was. Matt Canada is what he was. There was a game where George Pickens was going into it with the spotlight on him against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And again, weather was a factor there as well. But outside of one catch, one route, one play, he was held in check. He can't do that this season. He needs to be able to break through when all the lights and all the attention's on him. And that's going to be a big question mark for him. And that's going to be a big test for him in 2024.
I agree. I don't disagree with that one. And that's a good point. That's a good argument to make. That's very true. You can't have those this year. It's all going to come down to a lot of things. I will say this. I don't think George Pickens is a $30 million a year wide receiver next offseason. I think he's a 20 million a year wide receiver, maybe a 22 million a year wide receiver, but that's not even expensive in the wide receiver market when you're looking long term over the next 4 or 5 years. It'll just keep climbing. So I think that he's there. I agree with you. You can't have games like you did against Jacksonville. That can't happen. I still look at him. I could still picture him so vividly looking me in the eyes saying, I kept receipts. And then after the game, letting it be known that I was on the receipts. It's like, all right, I get it. I would be, I would be on the receipts too. If it was reversed, you would be on my I get it. I 100% understand